The cold, unforgiving winds of the Montana Territory whispered secrets across the valley as Violet Winslow pressed her back against the wooden barn wall, her breath catching in her throat. The year was 1878, and for the 18 years of her life, she had never dared to defy her father until today. "You worthless girl!" Franklin Winslow's voice boomed through the barn, reverberating off the timbers overhead. His massive frame cast a long shadow across the hay-strewn floor as he advanced on his daughter, leather whip unfurled in his clenched fist. "I told you never to speak to that cattle buyer. You've shamed this family for the last time." Violet's chest heaved with each panicked breath. The bruises from last week's lesson had barely faded from her arms. "Please, Father, I was only answering his questions about the ranch." "I didn't mean any." "Silence!" Franklin roared, raising the whip high above his head, the leather singing through the air as it descended. Violet closed her eyes, bracing for the familiar sting of leather against skin, but the blow never came. Instead, she heard the sharp crack of the whip meeting resistance, followed by her father's startled grunt. "Never again." The voice was deep, steady, and unfamiliar. Violet's eyes flew open to see a tall figure standing between her and her father, the whip's end wrapped firmly around his forearm. Blood seeped through his shirt where the leather had cut into his skin, but his grip remained unwavering. Hayden Irving stood like an immovable mountain, his blue eyes piercing through Franklin Winslow with the intensity of a lightning strike. The cowboy had ridden onto the Winslow ranch just 2 weeks prior, seeking work as a ranch hand. His lean, muscular frame and quiet demeanor had earned him quick respect among the other workers, but in this moment, there was nothing quiet about him. "You have no right to interfere with how I discipline my daughter, Cowboy," Franklin seethed, attempting to jerk the whip free from Hayden's grasp. "This is my property, my ranch, my family." "And this is my conscience," Hayden replied, his voice low but carrying the weight of steel. With a swift motion, he yanked the whip from Franklin's hand and tossed it aside. "No man raises a whip to a woman in my presence. Not now, not ever." Franklin's face purpled with rage. "You're fired, Irving. Get off my land before I put a bullet in you." "Father, please," Violet began, but Hayden's gentle hand on her shoulder stopped her words. "It's all right, Miss Winslow," he said, his eyes never leaving Franklin's furious glare. "I'd rather lose my job than stand by and watch this happen." The standoff seemed to stretch for eternity, the barn silent except for the nervous shuffling of horses in their stalls. Finally, Franklin spat on the ground at Hayden's feet. "You've got until sundown to clear out," he growled before turning to Violet. "And you get back to the house. I'll deal with you later." As Franklin stormed out of the barn, Violet released the breath she'd been holding, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her. Hayden's steadying hand remained on her shoulder. "Are you all right, Miss Winslow?" he asked, genuine concern etched across his sun-weathered face. Violet nodded numbly, her gaze dropping to his bleeding arm. "You're hurt, because of me." Hayden glanced at his wound as if noticing it for the first time. It's nothing that won't heal." His expression darkened. Has this happened before?" Violet turned away, shame coloring her cheeks. "My father has strong ideas about raising children, especially since my mother passed." "That ain't raising. That's tyranny," Hayden said firmly. "And no one deserves to live under a tyrant." "It's the only life I know," Violet whispered, reaching up to tuck a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, revealing a faded scar near her temple. Hayden's jaw tightened at the sight. "It doesn't have to be." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood suffering and survival. For the first time in years, Violet felt a flicker of hope stir within her chest. "You should go," she said reluctantly. My father doesn't make idle threats. I'll go, Hayden agreed, but this isn't the end. I promise you that, Miss Winslow. As Hayden turned to leave, Violet reached out impulsively, catching his hand. Thank you, she said, her voice barely audible. No one's ever stood up for me before. His fingers tightened briefly around hers. Then they've all done you a grave disservice. With those words lingering in the air between them, Hayden strode out of the barn, leaving Violet with the unfamiliar sensation of being truly seen for the first time in her life. The house felt more oppressive than ever as Violet prepared dinner that evening, her father brooding silently at the head of the table. The vacant chairs where her mother and brother once sat seemed to mock her, reminders of a time when laughter had filled their home. Timothy had fled 3 years ago, unable to bear their father's iron rule any longer. Her mother had simply faded away, like a flower denied sunlight, until consumption claimed what little remained of her spirit. That cowboy had no right, Franklin finally spoke, slamming his fist against the wooden table. No right at all. Violet kept her eyes on her plate. He was only trying to help. Help, Franklin sneered. You think a drifter like that cares about helping? Men like that want one thing from young women, and you're fool enough to believe whatever pretty lies he spins. Hayden isn't like that, Violet replied before she could stop herself. Her father's eyes narrowed dangerously. Hayden, is it? Already on a first-name basis. Just how long have you been sneaking around with that saddle tramp? I haven't been sneaking anywhere. He's worked here for 2 weeks, that's all. And in 2 weeks, you've forgotten every value I've taught you. Franklin pushed back from the table, his chair scraping harshly against the wooden floor. Your mother would be ashamed. The words cut deeper than any whip could have. Mama would never have wanted this for me, Violet said, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. She wouldn't have wanted me to live in fear. Franklin's hand shot out, gripping Violet's wrist with bruising force. You watch your mouth, girl. This is my house, and you'll abide by my rules as long as you live under my roof. And if I don't want to live under your roof anymore? The question hung in the air like gunsmoke. Her father released her wrist with a harsh laugh. And where would you go? You have no money, no skills. That pretty face won't keep you fed for long. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her cheek. The world out there eats naive girls like you for breakfast. At least here you're protected. The word rang hollow in Violet's ears as she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her small bedroom. The moonlight filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. Her father's idea of protection had left more scars than safety. A soft tapping at her window startled her from her thoughts. Cautiously, Violet slipped from her bed and parted the curtains. Her heart leaped into her throat at the sight of Hayden standing below, motioning for her to open the window. Glancing nervously at her bedroom door, Violet unlatched the window and leaned out. "What are you doing here?" she whispered urgently. "If my father catches you, I couldn't leave knowing what might happen to you," Hayden replied, his voice low. "I've got horses waiting at the edge of the property. Come with me, Miss Winslow." Violet's breath caught. "Come with you." "Where?" "My sister runs a boarding house in Helena. You'd be safe there while you figure things out." His eyes, illuminated by moonlight, were earnest. "I know it's asking a lot to trust a man you barely know, but I swear on my life I mean you no harm." The offer dangled before her like a lifeline, terrifying in its uncertainty, yet more promising than the guaranteed suffering that awaited her at her father's hands. "He'll come looking for me," Violet said, glancing back at the darkened hallway beyond her door. "Let him," Hayden replied with quiet confidence. "You're not his property, Miss Winslow. You're a free woman entitled to make your own choices." Free. The word resonated through Violet's very being. Could she really be free of the fear, the pain, the constant walking on eggshells? "I'll need a minute to pack some things," she decided, heart racing with equal parts fear and exhilaration. Hayden nodded. "I'll wait, but hurry." With trembling hands, Violet stuffed a few essential belongings into a small carpet bag, her mother's silver hairbrush, a change of clothes, the treasured copy of Jane Eyre that had been her escape during the darkest times. She changed quickly from her nightgown into a simple dress, pulling on her sturdiest boots. As she prepared to climb through the window, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside her room. Violet froze, her blood turning to ice as the heavy footsteps approached her door. "Violet." Franklin's voice, thick with sleep and suspicion, preceded the turning of her doorknob. "Who are you talking to?" Without a second to lose, Violet thrust her bag through the window to Hayden and scrambled after it just as the door swung open. "Violet." Her father bellowed, lunging for her ankle as she slipped through the opening. His fingers grazed her boot, but Hayden was there, pulling her safely to the ground below. "Run," Hayden urged, grabbing her hand as Franklin's enraged face appeared at the window. They sprinted across the moonlit yard, Franklin's threats echoing behind them. Violet heard the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being loaded, and terror gave wings to her feet. "Get on," Hayden commanded when they reached the horses. He helped her mount a chestnut mare before swinging onto his own horse. "Stay low and follow me." They rode hard into the night, leaving the only home Violet had ever known receding into darkness. The wind whipped tears from her eyes as they galloped across the open prairie, but whether they were tears of fear or liberation, she couldn't tell. After an hour of hard riding, when there was no sign of pursuit, Hayden finally slowed their pace. "Are you all right?" he asked, studying her face in the pale moonlight. Violet nodded, though her entire body trembled with the enormity of what she'd done. "I can't believe I just left, after all these years of being too afraid." "Courage isn't about not feeling fear," Hayden said gently. "It's about feeling it and moving forward anyway. What you did back there took more courage than most men I know possess." His words warmed something deep inside her. "Where are we going now?" "There's an old line shack about 10 miles west of here. We can rest there until morning, then continue to Helena." Hayden's expression grew serious. "I know this is forward of me, Miss Winslow, but may I ask what happened to your mother? Your father mentioned her at the barn." Violet's hand instinctively rose to touch the locket around her neck, the only keepsake she had of her mother. "She died 3 winters ago. Consumption, they said, but—" She paused, gathering her courage. "She was never strong after what my father did to her. When my brother Timothy ran away, father blamed her. The beating she took that night, something inside her just seemed to break. After that, she just faded away little by little." Hayden's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "I'm sorry. No one should have to witness that." "The worst part is knowing I might have ended up the same way," Violet admitted, "if you hadn't intervened today." "But I did," Hayden said firmly. "And now you've taken control of your own destiny. That's something to be proud of." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the vastness of the Montana night surrounding them. For the first time in years, Violet felt the constraints that had bound her begin to loosen, one thread at a time. The line shack appeared as a dark silhouette against the star-studded sky, a small, crude cabin used by cowboys during cattle drives. Hayden dismounted first and helped Violet from her horse, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "It's not much," he apologized as he lit a lantern inside the single-room structure. "But it's shelter." The interior was spare but clean, with a small wood stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bunk against one wall. Hayden busied himself starting a fire in the stove while Violet stood awkwardly in the center of the room, suddenly aware of the intimacy of their situation. "You take the bunk," Hayden said, seemingly reading her thoughts. "I'll sleep by the fire." "Thank you," Violet replied softly. "Not just for the bunk, but for everything. You risked so much for a stranger." Hayden paused in his work, the firelight casting his features in warm relief. "Perhaps, but I couldn't call myself a man if I'd ridden away and left you to that fate." "How did you know?" Violet asked, settling onto one of the chairs. "About my father, I mean. You'd only been at the ranch 2 weeks." "I've seen that look before," Hayden said quietly, adding another stick to the growing flames. "In my mother's eyes, years ago, my father wasn't much different from yours." Understanding dawned. "That's why you stopped him. It wasn't just about me." "No," Hayden admitted, "but that doesn't make what I did any less right." He poured water from his canteen into a small pot and set it on the stove. "I have some coffee if you'd like." Violet nodded gratefully, watching as this enigmatic man moved with easy confidence around the small cabin. "What will happen when we reach Helena?" "My sister Hannah runs a respectable boarding house for working women. You'll have a safe place to stay, meals provided, and she can help you find employment if you wish." Hayden handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "You'll be free to make your own decisions." "And you?" Violet asked, cradling the warm cup between her hands. "What will you do?" A shadow crossed Hayden's face. "I've been drifting for 5 years now, never staying in one place too long. I suppose I'll keep moving. There's always ranch work for a man who knows horses." Something like disappointment settled in Violet's chest. The thought of Hayden riding away once they reached Helena left an unexpected emptiness. "Why do you drift?" she asked, then blushed at her boldness. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "No, it's a fair question." Hayden settled onto the other chair, his long legs stretched toward the fire. "After my mother died, I had a disagreement with my father that ended badly. I left home at 17 and haven't stopped moving since." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Guess I'm still running from something, though I'm not sure what anymore." "Perhaps we're both starting new chapters," Violet offered. Hayden studied her face across the rim of his coffee cup. "Perhaps we are." As the night deepened around the small cabin, they talked of lighter things, books they'd read, places Hayden had seen in his travels, the beauty of Montana in different seasons. Violet found herself laughing for what felt like the first time in years. The weight of her father's oppression temporarily lifted from her shoulders. When exhaustion finally claimed her, Violet lay on the narrow bunk, listening to Hayden's steady breathing from his bedroll near the fire. Despite the uncertainty that tomorrow would bring, she felt strangely peaceful. Whatever happened in Helena, she had taken the first step toward freedom, and that was a victory no one could take from her. The journey to Helena took 3 days of careful travel. They avoided main roads and settlements, taking shelter in abandoned homesteads or sleeping under the vast canopy of stars. Hayden proved to be as respectful as he was resourceful, always maintaining a proper distance despite their intimate circumstances. By the time the city came into view, nestled in its mountain valley, Violet had grown accustomed to Hayden's quiet companionship. The thought of parting ways left an ache in her chest she couldn't quite explain. "There it is," Hayden said, reining his horse to a stop on a ridge overlooking the bustling mining town. "Helena, population growing every day with the gold and silver strikes." Violet took in the sight of the largest settlement she'd ever seen, intimidated by the maze of buildings and the smokestacks of the smelters in the distance. "It's enormous." "It might seem that way now," Hayden smiled reassuringly, "but you'll find your way. Hannah will help you." They rode into town as dusk was falling. the streets still busy with miners returning from their claims and merchants closing up shops. Violet felt conspicuous on horseback, aware of curious glances from passers-by, many of whom nodded respectfully to Hayden. Irving's boarding house stood 3 streets back from the main thoroughfare, a handsome 2-story structure with fresh white paint and green shutters. A small, neatly tended garden flanked the walkway, and lace curtains adorned the windows. "This is it," Hayden said, dismounting and helping Violet from her horse. "Hannah's made something fine here." The door opened before they reached it, and a woman who could only be Hayden's sister stepped onto the porch. Hannah Irving was tall like her brother, with the same striking blue eyes, though her brown hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples. Her face lit up at the sight of Hayden. "Well, I'll be damned," she exclaimed, hurrying down the steps to embrace him. "5 years without so much as a letter, and you just show up on my doorstep." She pulled back to inspect him, her joy tempered with sisterly scolding. "You look thin. Haven't you been eating?" "Good to see you too, Hannah," Hayden grinned, the first truly carefree expression Violet had seen on his face. "I've been eating just fine." Hannah's attention shifted to Violet, her gaze warm but assessing. "And who's this?" "Violet Winslow," Hayden introduced her. "Miss Winslow, my sister Hannah Irving." "Please call me Violet," she said, extending her hand somewhat shyly. Hannah clasped it firmly. "Any friend of my brother's is welcome here, though I suspect there's a story behind this unexpected visit." "There is," Hayden confirmed, his expression growing serious. "One best told inside." Hannah led them through a cozy parlor where several women were engaged in quiet conversation or needlework. They looked up curiously as the trio passed, but Hannah offered no explanations as she ushered them into a private sitting room at the back of the house. Once seated with cups of tea, Hayden recounted the events at the Winslow ranch, sparing no details about Franklin's treatment of Violet. Hannah's face grew increasingly troubled as the story unfolded, her eyes occasionally darting to Violet with undisguised compassion. "You poor dear," she said when Hayden finished. "Of course you'll stay here. I have a lovely room on the 2nd floor that just became available." "You'll be safe with us." "I can't impose," Violet protested weakly. "And I have very little money." Hannah waved away her concerns. "We'll work something out. Perhaps you could help with some of the duties around the boarding house until you find your feet." Relief washed over Violet. "I would be happy to help in any way I can. I'm a decent cook, and my mother taught me fine needlework." "Excellent. Those skills will serve you well here." Hannah turned to her brother. "And you, Hayden, will you be staying in Helena for a while?" A shadow crossed his face. "I hadn't planned on it. I've got a job waiting in Virginia City. The Silver Star Ranch needs experienced hands for their spring drive." Though Violet had expected this answer, disappointment still twisted in her stomach. She kept her expression carefully neutral, not wanting to burden Hayden with obligations beyond what he had already undertaken on her behalf. "Surely you can delay a few days," Hannah pressed, a knowing look in her eye as she glanced between her brother and Violet. "After such a journey, you both need rest, and it would give Miss Winslow time to settle in before you disappear again." Hayden hesitated, his gaze meeting Violet's across the table. Something unspoken passed between them, a current of connection neither could deny. "I suppose I could send word to the Silver Star that I'll be delayed," he conceded. "A few days' rest would do us both good." Hannah smiled, satisfied. "That's settled then. Now let me show you to your rooms. You both look dead on your feet." As they followed Hannah upstairs, Violet's hand brushed against Hayden's, a fleeting touch that sent warmth coursing through her veins. He didn't pull away, and for a brief, breathless moment, their fingers intertwined. Perhaps, Violet thought, Her new beginning might include more than just freedom from her father's tyranny. Perhaps it might also include the quiet cowboy who had risked everything to give her that freedom. The next morning, Violet awoke to sunlight streaming through lace curtains and the unfamiliar sounds of a busy household below. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, but then the events of the past few days came rushing back. She was in Helena, in Hannah Irving's boarding house, free from her father's control for the first time in her life. The room Hannah had given her was small but charming, with a brass bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small writing desk beneath the window. It was more private space than she'd ever had at the ranch, where her father had insisted on keeping her door ajar at all times. After washing and dressing in her spare clothes, now woefully inadequate for her new circumstances, Violet ventured downstairs. She found Hannah in the kitchen, directing a whirlwind of activity as breakfast was prepared for the dozen women who resided in the boarding house. "Good morning, dear," Hannah greeted her warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," Violet admitted. "Thank you again for taking me in." "Nonsense. Any woman needing sanctuary is welcome here. That's why I started this place." Hannah handed her a stack of plates. "Would you mind setting the dining table, 6 places on each side?" Grateful for the task, Violet set about arranging the table while Hannah explained the rhythms of the boarding house. Most residents were working women teachers, shopkeepers, and seamstresses who preferred the safety and respectability of a women's boarding house to living alone. "We look out for each other here," Hannah explained, carrying in a platter of flapjacks. "Many of my girls have stories not so different from yours." Before Violet could respond, the back door swung open and Hayden entered, his arms laden with firewood. The sight of him hair tousled, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms sent an unexpected flutter through Violet's chest. "Morning," he nodded to both women, depositing the wood in the box beside the large cook stove. "Hannah put me to work as soon as my boots hit the floor." "As well I should," Hannah retorted good-naturedly. "Can't have you getting soft, little brother." "I'm hardly little anymore," Hayden laughed, straightening to his full 6'2" height. "Perhaps not in stature," Hannah conceded, "but you'll always be my kid brother." She turned to Violet. "He may look imposing now, but you should have seen him at 12 all knees and elbows, following me around like a lost pup." "Hannah," Hayden protested, a flush creeping up his neck. Violet couldn't help laughing at his discomfort. "I think it's sweet. I always wished for siblings growing up." "You're an only child?" Hannah asked, arranging biscuits on another platter. "I have a brother, Timothy, but he left home when I was 15. Violet's smile faded. "My father was difficult with him too. Timothy couldn't take it anymore, so he ran. I haven't heard from him since." Hayden's expression darkened. "Your father has much to answer for." "Perhaps," Violet said quietly, "but I prefer to look forward now, not back." Hannah exchanged a meaningful glance with her brother before turning back to Violet. "That's a wise perspective. Now, let's finish getting breakfast on the table before my ladies start a revolt." The morning passed in a flurry of activity as Violet helped serve breakfast, clear dishes, and learn the daily routine of the boarding house. Several of the residents introduced themselves, curious but kind, asking no prying questions about her sudden arrival. By midday, Violet felt a tentative sense of belonging she'd never experienced at the Winslow ranch. After the lunch dishes were cleared, Hannah insisted Violet accompany her into town. "You need more than one dress if you're starting a new life," she declared. "And I need to introduce you to some people who might have worked for a young woman with your skills." To Violet's surprise, Hayden offered to escort them. "Town can be rough this time of month when the miners get paid," he explained, And there's a chance your father might have sent word ahead to look for you. The thought of her father pursuing her sent a chill down Violet's spine. Do you really think he'd come all this way? Men like Franklin Winslow don't take kindly to having their authority challenged, Hayden said grimly. Until we know for certain he's not looking for you, it's best to be cautious. Helena's main street bustled with activity miners fresh from the diggings. Businessmen in fine suits, ladies in fashionable dresses, and the occasional cowboy like Hayden, distinguishable by their practical attire and watchful demeanor. Violet had never seen so many people in one place, and she found herself drawing closer to Hayden's protective presence. Hannah led them to a modest dress shop owned by a Mrs. Peterson, who greeted them warmly. "Hannah Irving, it's been too long since you visited my establishment." "I've been busy with the boarding house," Hannah explained, introducing Violet. "Miss Winslow is staying with me and needs a few essential items. Her luggage was unfortunately lost during her journey." Violet shot Hannah a grateful look for the diplomatic explanation. "Of course, my dear Mrs. Peterson said kindly. "Let's see what we can find for you." While Hayden waited patiently outside the shop, Hannah helped Violet select 2 serviceable day dresses, a shirtwaist and skirt for work, and the necessary underthings. When Violet protested at the expense, Hannah waved away her concerns. "Consider it an advance on your wages," she said. "You'll work it off helping at the boarding house, and when you find employment in town, you can repay me if it makes you feel better." Their next stop was the millinery shop, where Hannah introduced Violet to Mrs. Abernathy, a widow who ran the business alone. "Eleanor is looking for an assistant," Hannah explained. "I thought your needlework skills might be just what she needs." Mrs. Abernathy studied Violet thoughtfully. "Do you have experience with hat-making, dear?" "Not specifically," Violet admitted, "but my mother taught me embroidery, lace-making, and general sewing. I'm a quick learner." Mrs. Abernathy held out a piece of velvet and a needle. "Show me your stitch work." Under the older woman's watchful eye, Violet demonstrated several decorative stitches. When she finished, Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "Your mother taught you well. I could use help 3 days a week to start. The pay isn't much, but it's honest work." Joy surged through Violet. "I would be very grateful for the opportunity, Mrs. Abernathy." "You can start next Monday," the milliner decided. 9 o'clock sharp. Outside the shop, Violet could barely contain her excitement. "I have a position, already." Hayden's smile warmed his eyes. "I'm not surprised. You've got more skills than you give yourself credit for." "Helena is full of opportunities for a young woman willing to work," Hannah added, linking her arm through Violet's. "This is just the beginning." As they continued down the street, Hayden suddenly stiffened, his hand moving instinctively to Violet's elbow. "Keep walking," he murmured. "Don't look back." Alarmed, Violet resisted the urge to turn around. "What is it?" 2 men by the saloon. "They're asking questions, showing a paper to folks." "Could be nothing but—" "Or it could be men sent by my father," Violet finished, fear clutching at her throat. "Let's not jump to conclusions," Hannah said calmly, though her pace quickened. "But perhaps we should return to the boarding house for now." They took a circuitous route back, Hayden vigilant the entire way. Only when they were safely inside Hannah's parlor did Violet allow herself to tremble. "He's looking for me," she whispered. "He won't let me go without a fight." Hayden's expression was grim. "Then he'll have a fight on his hands." "No violence," Hannah warned. "That's not the solution here." "What is the solution?" Violet asked, wrapping her arms around herself. "I can't spend my life hiding." Hannah considered for a moment. "We need to establish your independence legally. A woman over 18 has the right to make her own decisions, but your father could claim you're unstable or that you were coerced." "I'll speak to Judge Wilson," Hayden suggested. "He's a fair man. He might be willing to hear Violet's testimony about her father's treatment." "That could work," Hannah agreed. "And in the meantime, you stay close to the boarding house. No wandering alone until we're sure it's safe." The implications of her situation settled heavily on Violet's shoulders. She had escaped her father physically, but the shadow of his control still loomed. Freedom, it seemed, would require more courage yet. That evening, after the other boarders had retired, Violet found herself unable to sleep. She slipped downstairs to the kitchen, hoping a cup of warm milk might calm her nerves. To her surprise, Hayden was seated at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee between his hands, staring contemplatively at the dying embers in the stove. He looked up at her entrance, a soft smile crossing his features. "Couldn't sleep either." Violet shook her head, suddenly conscious of her simple nightgown and wrapper. "Too many thoughts. I know the feeling." Hayden rose and pulled out a chair for her. "Would you like some milk? Hannah always keeps some warming at the back of the stove." "Thank you," Violet said, settling into the chair as Hayden poured her a mug. "Have you always been this kind, or am I a special case?" The question surprised them both, and Hayden paused before answering. "I'd like to think I treat everyone with decency," he said carefully. "But I'll admit, there's something about you that makes me want to be better." The simple honesty of his words touched Violet deeply. "I've never met a man like you before." "I reckon you haven't met many men at all with your father standing guard," Hayden observed, returning to his seat across from her. "That's true," Violet acknowledged. "The ranch was isolated and father discouraged visitors." She sipped her milk, gathering courage for her next words. "But even if I'd met 100 men, I think you'd still stand apart." Hayden's eyes, illuminated by the faint glow from the stove, studied her face with an intensity that made her heart race. "You should be careful saying things like that to a man you barely know." "Perhaps," Violet agreed softly. "But I'm learning to trust my instincts, and they tell me you're a good man, Hayden Irving." His hand moved across the table, hesitating before covering hers. "And you're a remarkable woman, Violet Winslow, far stronger than you realize." The touch of his calloused palm against her skin sent warmth spiraling through her. In this quiet, firelit kitchen, miles from her father's reach, Violet felt something new unfurling inside her, not just freedom, but possibility. "Tell me about Virginia City," she asked, not withdrawing her hand from his. "Is it far from here?" "About 70 miles southwest," Hayden replied. "It's grown since the gold strikes, but it's still smaller than Helena. And that's where you'll go when you leave." The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Hayden's thumb traced a gentle pattern across her knuckles. "That was the plan," he said slowly. "But plans can change." "Because of me?" Violet asked, bolder than she'd ever been. Hayden's gaze was steady. "Would that be so terrible?" "No," she whispered. "It wouldn't be terrible at all." The kitchen clock ticked away the seconds as they sat there, connected by touch and the dawning recognition of feelings neither had expected to find. Eventually, reluctantly, Hayden withdrew his hand. "You should get some rest," he said, his voice rougher than before. "Tomorrow we'll see Judge Wilson about ensuring your legal independence." Violet nodded, rising from her chair with a strange mixture of disappointment and anticipation. At the kitchen doorway, she paused and looked back at him. "Good night, Hayden." His smile in the dimness made her heart flutter. "Good night, Violet. Sweet dreams." As she climbed the stairs back to her room, Violet realized that for the first time in years, sweet dreams seemed not just possible but probable. The following day brought both progress and complication. Judge Wilson, a stern-faced man with kind eyes, agreed to hear Violet's testimony about her father's abuse, and to issue a formal statement affirming her right to live independently. It was not, he explained, a restraining order as such, those being relatively uncommon, but it would serve as legal protection should Franklin attempt to force Violet to return home. Any attempt to compel an adult woman against her will would constitute kidnapping, the judge explained. This document makes clear that you are acting of your own volition in separating from your father's household. Relief flooded through Violet as she signed the paper with a steady hand. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me for upholding the law, Miss Winslow," Judge Wilson replied gruffly. "Though I will say, it takes courage to stand up for oneself as you have done." As they left the courthouse, Hayden squeezed Violet's hand. One more step toward true freedom. The complication came later that afternoon, when Hannah burst into the boarding house parlor where Violet was mending linens. "They're here," she announced without preamble. "Two men asking for you by name at Hollister's General Store. One of them had a poster with your likeness." Violet's hand stilled on her needlework. "Did they say who sent them?" "They claimed to be your cousins, concerned for your welfare after you wandered off in a state of confusion." Hannah's expression was stormy. "Obviously a lie. But they're offering a reward for information, which means someone will talk eventually." "What do we do?" Violet asked, fear threatening to overwhelm the confidence she had begun to build. "For now, you stay indoors," Hannah decided. "Hayden has gone to confirm whether these men work for your father, and to warn our friends in town not to speak of you." The waiting was excruciating. Violet paced the parlor, imagining her father's hired men dragging her back to the ranch, picturing the punishment that would await her for her defiance. By the time Hayden returned at dusk, she had worked herself into a state of near panic. "It's all right," he assured her immediately, taking her trembling hands in his. "They're not lawmen, just hired guns. They have no legal authority to take you anywhere." "But they're still looking for me," Violet said. "Yes," Hayden acknowledged. "And they're staying at the Grand Hotel, which means they're not leaving town anytime soon." Hannah, who had joined them, crossed her arms. "This can't go on indefinitely. Violet can't remain a prisoner in the boarding house out of fear." "I've been thinking about that," Hayden said slowly. "Judge Wilson's document protects Violet legally, but it won't stop these men from trying to intimidate her or cause trouble." He hesitated, his eyes meeting Violet's. "There is another option that would make their efforts futile." "What option?" Violet asked. Hayden took a deep breath. "Marriage." The word hung in the air between them. Violet's heart stuttered in her chest. "Hayden," Hannah exclaimed. "That's hardly hear me out," he interrupted. "In the eyes of the law, a married woman is under her husband's protection, not her father's. Franklin would have no claim on Violet whatsoever if she were wed." "So you're suggesting she marry?" "Who exactly?" Hannah demanded. Hayden's gaze remained fixed on Violet's face. "Me." A shocked silence followed his declaration. Violet could scarcely breathe, let alone form a coherent response. "This is absurd," Hannah finally sputtered. "You've known each other barely a week. Marriage is not something to enter into lightly, especially not as a legal maneuver." "I know that," Hayden replied, his voice steady. "But I also know that sometimes life doesn't follow the conventional path." He squeezed Violet's hands gently. "This would be a marriage in name only, Violet. You would have my protection without any obligations. And when these men are gone and your father gives up his search, we could seek an annulment if you wished." Violet found her voice at last. "You would do that for me. Tie yourself to a woman you barely know." "I know enough," Hayden said simply. "I know you're brave and kind and deserving of a life free from fear. The rest—" his voice softened. "The rest we could discover together in whatever way suits us both." Hannah threw up her hands. "I can't believe I'm hearing this. You're both being entirely irrational. Perhaps, Violet acknowledged, not taking her eyes from Hayden's. But sometimes the heart sees clearer than the head. Your heart, Hannah challenged, or your fear? It was a fair question, one that gave Violet pause. Was she considering Hayden's offer out of genuine feeling or merely as an escape from her father's reach? I need time to think, she decided. This isn't a decision to make in haste, even under these circumstances. Relief crossed Hannah's face. That's sensible, at least. Hayden nodded, releasing Violet's hands. Take all the time you need. The offer stands, but only if it's what you truly want. That night, Violet lay awake for hours, turning over Hayden's proposition in her mind. Marriage. The word itself carried such weight, such permanence. Yet there was an undeniable appeal in the safety it would provide, and if she were honest with herself, an even stronger appeal in the man offering it. In their short time together, Hayden had shown himself to be honorable, kind, and respectful. He had risked his life to protect her without hesitation. She felt drawn to him in ways she had never experienced before, a pull that went beyond gratitude or physical attraction, though both existed in abundance. But was that enough? Could feelings born in crisis survive in calmer waters? And what of Hayden's nomadic life? Would he come to resent being tied to her, even in name only? The questions chased each other through her mind until dawn began to lighten the sky outside her window. By the time Violet rose to help with breakfast preparations, she had reached no clear conclusion, only the certainty that whatever she decided would irrevocably alter the course of her life. Hayden was absent from breakfast, having left at first light to check on the men searching for Violet. His absence gave her space to think, but also made her acutely aware of how quickly he had become important to her. He means well, Hannah said quietly as they washed dishes together afterward. My brother has always had a protective streak. But marriage is a serious commitment, not just a legal shield. I know, Violet replied, scrubbing a pot with perhaps more vigor than necessary. But what if it could be both, a protection and something more? Hannah studied her thoughtfully. You have feelings for him. It wasn't a question, but Violet answered anyway. Yes, I know it seems impossibly fast, but yes. And you think he returns these feelings? I believe he might. Violet set down the pot, facing Hannah directly. When he looks at me, when he speaks to me. There's a tenderness there that feels real. Hayden doesn't offer what he doesn't mean, Hannah conceded. That's always been true of him, but rushing into marriage, she sighed deeply. I just don't want either of you to make a decision you'll regret. What would you do? Violet asked. If you were in my position, Hannah considered for a long moment. I'd probably ask for a third option, neither hiding indefinitely nor rushing to the altar. There must be another way to secure your independence. Before Violet could respond, the back door swung open and Hayden entered, his expression grim. We have a problem, he announced. Your father is in Helena. The blood drained from Violet's face. He came himself. Arrived on the morning stage, Hayden confirmed. He's at the sheriff's office now, filing a formal complaint that you were coerced away from home. His jaw tightened. He's claiming I kidnapped you for immoral purposes. That's absurd, Hannah exclaimed. Sheriff Taylor knows our family. He won't believe such nonsense. Maybe not, but he still has to investigate the complaint. Hayden ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I need to go speak with him, present our side of the story. The judge's document should help, but my father can be very convincing, Violet finished, sick dread pooling in her stomach. He'll paint me as confused, manipulated. Not if you speak for yourself, Hannah said firmly. You're a grown woman of sound mind. Your testimony carries weight. Hayden nodded in agreement. Will you come with me to see Sheriff Taylor? If we both explain what happened at the ranch, it should put this matter to rest. The thought of confronting authority terrified Violet, but she squared her shoulders. Yes, it's time I stopped hiding and stood up for myself. You won't be alone, Hayden promised, his eyes conveying far more than his words. In that moment, looking at the determination in his face, Violet knew her answer to his proposal. It wasn't fear driving her decision, but something much more profound, a recognition of the rare and precious connection they shared. A bond forged in crisis, but built on mutual respect and growing affection. Before we go, she said, her voice steadier than she expected, I want to give you my answer about your offer. Hannah glanced between them, then discreetly slipped from the room, leaving them alone. Hayden's expression was carefully neutral, but Violet could see the tension in the set of his shoulders. You don't need to decide now, with this new pressure. I do, Violet interrupted gently. Because this isn't about my father or legal protection, or anything except what I feel when I'm with you. She took a deep breath. My answer is yes, Hayden. I'll marry you not just for protection, but because I believe we could build something real together, something good. The neutrality fell away from his face, replaced by a look of such naked hope and joy that it took Violet's breath away. In 2 long strides, Hayden closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. Are you certain? He asked, searching her eyes. This isn't something I want you to do out of necessity or gratitude. I'm certain, Violet affirmed, squeezing his hands. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Hayden's smile transformed his entire face, making him look younger, lighter. Then I am the luckiest man in Montana territory. He lifted one hand to gently cup her cheek. May I? Violet nodded, her heart racing as Hayden slowly leaned down. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question as much as an answer. When they parted, both were smiling like fools. Well, Hayden said softly, that settles it. Now let's go deal with your father once and for all. Sheriff James Taylor was a stocky man with a salt and pepper mustache and the weathered face of someone who had seen his share of trouble in the boom and bust cycles of Montana's mining towns. He listened with careful attention as Violet recounted her father's history of abuse and the incident with the whip that had prompted her departure. Franklin Winslow, seated across the sheriff's office with barely contained rage, interrupted repeatedly. She's always been prone to hysterics and exaggeration. Ask anyone at the ranch. I've given her everything: a good home, education, protection. Protection? Hayden challenged, his voice dangerously quiet. Is that what you call it when you take a whip to your daughter? Franklin's face mottled with anger. You stay out of this, Cowboy. You've done enough damage, filling her head with nonsense and luring her away. Mr. Winslow, Sheriff Taylor interjected firmly, your daughter is 19 years old, legally entitled to make her own decisions. I have here a signed statement from Judge Wilson affirming that fact. He held up the document. Unless you have evidence that Miss Winslow is mentally incompetent or was physically forced to leave your property, there's no crime for me to investigate. She's been bewitched by this saddle tramp, Franklin insisted. Look at her, she's never disobeyed me before he came along. Perhaps because she feared ending up like her mother, Hayden said coldly. Franklin lunged to his feet. You know nothing about my wife. I know enough, Hayden replied, standing his ground. I know Violet watched her fade away after you beat her for your son's departure. I know you've ruled your household with fear instead of love. Sheriff, Violet spoke up, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I left willingly. More than willingly, I fled because I feared for my safety. I'm grateful Mr. Irving was there to help me, but the decision was mine. She drew herself up straighter, and I have no intention of returning to the ranch, ever. Sheriff Taylor studied her thoughtfully, then nodded. That seems clear enough to me. He turned to Franklin. "Mr. Winslow, I understand your concern for your daughter, but she's made her choice. I suggest you respect it." "This is outrageous," Franklin sputtered. "She's my daughter." "She's a grown woman," the sheriff corrected. "And unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, my advice is to return home and let her live her life." Franklin's cold gaze fixed on Violet. "You'll regret this. When he abandons you, as he inevitably will, don't come crawling back to me." "She won't need to," Hayden said firmly. "Because I won't be abandoning her. In fact," he glanced at Violet, receiving her nod of confirmation, "we intend to marry." The announcement landed like a thunderclap in the small office. Franklin's face went through a rapid succession of emotions: shock, disbelief, and finally a calculating assessment. "Is this true?" he demanded of Violet. "You're throwing yourself away on a drifter you've known for days." Violet met his gaze without flinching. "I'm choosing a man who treats me with respect and kindness, something I never experienced from you." Franklin's lip curled in disgust. "Then you're a bigger fool than I thought." He turned to the sheriff. "I wash my hands of her. Let her learn the hard way what kind of man she's chosen." With that parting shot, Franklin stormed from the office, slamming the door behind him. In the ringing silence that followed, Sheriff Taylor sighed heavily. "Well, that could have gone worse, I suppose." He fixed Hayden with a pointed look. "Is this marriage business genuine, or just something you said to get him off her back?" "It's genuine," Hayden confirmed, his hand finding Violet's, "though perhaps expedited by circumstances." The sheriff's weathered face softened slightly. "Life out here rarely follows a conventional path. Just make sure you're both entering into this with open eyes." He shuffled some papers on his desk. "I'll have my deputy keep an eye on Winslow until he leaves town. I don't think he'll cause trouble, but best to be cautious." "Thank you, Sheriff," Violet said sincerely. Outside the sheriff's office, Violet released a shuddering breath. "I can't believe I stood up to him." "I can," Hayden said, pride evident in his voice. "You're stronger than you know, Violet Winslow." "Soon to be Violet Irving," she reminded him with a small smile. "That is, if you haven't reconsidered now that the immediate danger has passed." Hayden's eyes were serious as he took both her hands in his. "The only thing I'm reconsidering is how soon we can make it official." His thumb brushed over her knuckles. "I meant what I said in there. This isn't just about protection anymore." "For me either," Violet admitted, her heart fuller than she had ever thought possible. "I know it's fast and probably seems foolish to others, but some things you just know," Hayden finished. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Hannah's going to have strong opinions about this." Violet laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I imagine she will, but I think she'll come around." Indeed, Hannah's reaction to their confirmed engagement ranged from exasperation to grudging acceptance to, finally, cautious enthusiasm. "If you're determined to do this," she declared, "then we'll do it properly. No hasty ceremony at the justice of the peace. You'll be married in the boarding house parlor with witnesses and cake and whatever finery we can muster on short notice." And so, 3 days later, days blessedly free from any further appearance by Franklin Winslow, who had apparently departed on the eastbound stage, Violet found herself standing before the town's Methodist minister in Hannah's flower-bedecked parlor, surrounded by the boarding house residents and a handful of friends Hayden had made during his previous visits to Helena. Mrs. Abernathy, Violet's new employer, had created a simple but elegant hat adorned with silk flowers to complement the cream-colored dress Hannah had insisted on purchasing for the occasion. "Every bride deserves something special," she had declared, brushing aside Violet's protests about the expense. As Violet spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, she marveled at the twisting path that had led her to this moment. Just 2 weeks ago, She had been a prisoner in her father's house, with no hope of escape or happiness. Now she stood pledging her life to a man whose courage and kindness had opened a door she hadn't even known existed. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Collins declared warmly. "You may kiss your bride." Hayden's kiss was tender but thorough, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. As they parted, his eyes shining with a joy that matched her own, Violet knew with bone-deep certainty that this marriage, for all its unusual beginnings, was right. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful, with Hannah's renowned cooking and a small but beautifully decorated cake. Several of the boarding house ladies played instruments, providing music for dancing late into the evening. Finally, as the last guests departed, Hannah hugged them both fiercely. "I've had a room prepared for you at the back of the house," she told them. "It's small but private. Consider it my wedding gift until you find a place of your own." The implications of what awaited them hung in the air as Hayden thanked his sister. For all their growing feelings, they had yet to discuss the physical aspect of their marriage. The thought sent both anticipation and nervousness fluttering through Violet's stomach as Hayden took her hand and led her down the hallway to their new quarters. The room was indeed small, dominated by a brass bed with a handmade quilt and illuminated by a single oil lamp. Someone, Hannah, presumably had placed a vase of wildflowers on the bedside table and turned down the covers. As the door closed behind them, sealing them in their private space for the first time, Hayden released Violet's hand and moved to stand by the window, giving her space. "We don't have to." He began, his back to her. "That is, I meant what I said about no obligations. This marriage can be whatever we want it to be at whatever pace feels right." His consideration touched Violet deeply. She crossed the room to stand behind him, laying a tentative hand on his shoulder. "Hayden." He turned, his eyes questioning. "I've spent my entire life being told what to do, how to feel, who to be," Violet said softly. "For the first time, I'm making my own choices, and I choose you, all of you, not just your name or protection." Hayden's breath caught. "Are you sure?" "I don't want you to feel rushed or obligated." In answer, Violet rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his. This kiss was different from their earlier ones, deeper, more certain. When Hayden's arms came around her, drawing her closer, she melted against him, her body responding instinctively to his touch. "I'm sure," she whispered when they finally parted. "I want to be your wife in every way." The tenderness with which Hayden loved her that night brought tears to Violet's eyes, not from pain or fear, but from the overwhelming realization that intimacy could be beautiful, respectful, and mutual. Each touch was a question and an answer, each kiss a promise. When they lay tangled together afterward, her head pillowed on his chest, Violet knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. "What happens now?" she asked, trailing her fingers across the lean muscles of his abdomen. Hayden caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. "Now we build a life. I've been thinking. The Silver Star Ranch job was temporary anyway. There's good land available south of here. With my savings and what I can earn working for other ranches while we get started, we could build our own place. Our own ranch." Violet lifted her head to look at him. "You'd settle in one place. For me, for us," Hayden corrected, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've been drifting long enough, Violet. It's time to put down roots, and there's no one I'd rather do that with than you." The vision he painted was so different from the prison of her father's ranch, a home built on partnership instead of fear, a future shaped by mutual dreams rather than one man's iron will. "I'd like that," she said, laying her head back on his chest. "Very much." In the weeks that followed, their life together began to take shape. Violet worked 3 days a week at the millinery shop, discovering a natural talent for design that Mrs. Abernathy was quick to encourage. Hayden found work with a local cattle broker, his knowledge of horseflesh and cattle prices proving valuable. They remained at the boarding house, saving every penny toward their dream of land. In the evenings, they would pore over maps and discuss plans for their future ranch where the house would stand, how many cattle they might run, whether they would specialize in horses as Hayden had always wanted. A month after their wedding, a letter arrived addressed to Violet. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the return address made her hands tremble. Bozeman, just a day's ride from Helena. "It's from Timothy," she whispered, staring at her brother's name. "My brother." Hayden, who had been reading the newspaper across the breakfast table, set it aside immediately. "How did he know where to find you?" "I don't know." Violet carefully opened the envelope, unfolding a single sheet of paper covered in neat, masculine script. "Dear Violet," she read aloud, her voice catching. "I hope this letter finds you well. I've been in Bozeman these past 3 years, working for the Gallatin Valley Freight Company. Last week, a driver came through from the south with strange news that Franklin Winslow's daughter had run off with a cowboy and was living in Helena. I scarcely dared hope it might be you, but I had to know. Are you truly free of him? Are you safe? If this reaches you, please write back. Your loving brother, Timothy." Tears blurred Violet's vision as she finished reading. "He's alive. All this time, I didn't know if he was even alive." Hayden reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Will you write back?" "Immediately," Violet affirmed. "And I'll tell him everything about Father, about us, about our plans for the future." Timothy's reply came swiftly, filled with both relief at Violet's escape and regret that he had left her behind. "I've thought of you every day," he wrote, "wondering if I should have stayed to protect you, or somehow found a way to take you with me. The guilt has been a constant companion. But now, knowing you've found happiness with your husband, I can finally forgive myself." He enclosed a photograph taken recently, a tall young man of 22, with Violet's same auburn hair and their mother's gentle eyes. In his next letter, Timothy explained that he had saved enough money to buy into the freight company as a junior partner. "Business is good," he wrote. "The railroad hasn't reached this far yet, so wagons are still the lifeblood of commerce." By summer's end, Timothy had visited twice, the siblings' reunion tearful but joyous. He and Hayden took to each other immediately, bonding over shared experiences and a mutual protective instinct toward Violet. "He's a good man," Timothy told Violet during his second visit as they watched Hayden and Hannah deep in conversation across the boarding house parlor. "I can see why you love him." "I do love him," Violet said, the words still new enough to send a thrill through her. "More than I thought possible. And your plans for the ranch, they're progressing," Violet nodded excitedly. Hayden found a perfect parcel of land along the Little Prickly Pear Creek, 160 acres with good water and natural shelter for cattle. "We're filing the homestead claim next week." Timothy hesitated, then reached into his coat pocket. "In that case, I have something for you." He withdrew an envelope. "Consider it a belated wedding gift." Inside the envelope, Violet found a bank draft for $500, a substantial sum that left her speechless. "Timothy, this is too much." "It's not nearly enough," he interrupted firmly. "It's a small portion of what I've saved these past years. I want you and Hayden to have it to help build your new life." Tears welled in Violet's eyes as she embraced her brother. "Thank you. This will make all the difference." Indeed it did. The money, combined with Hayden and Violet's savings, allowed them to file their homestead claim and begin building a modest cabin before winter set in. Hannah contributed furnishings from her attic, and the women from the boarding house sewed curtains and quilts as housewarming gifts. By November 1878, just 8 months after Hayden had caught Franklin's whip and changed the course of Violet's life forever, they moved into their new home. It was small, just 2 rooms to start, but it was theirs, built with their own hands on land that would one day, God willing, support a thriving ranch. Their first winter together tested their resilience. The cabin was drafty despite their best efforts. The snow piled high around the windows, and there were days when Hayden had to dig his way to the small barn they had constructed for their horses. But each night, they came together before the fire, sharing the day's triumphs and challenges, finding in each other the strength to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Spring brought new beginnings, the first calves of their small herd, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, and the discovery that their family would soon be growing. "A baby," Hayden whispered when Violet shared the news, his hand gently covering her still flat stomach. "Our child." The wonder in his voice brought tears to Violet's eyes. "Are you happy?" "Beyond words," he assured her, gathering her close. "Beyond anything I ever dreamed possible." As summer ripened the land around them, Violet's body changed too, rounding with new life. They added a third room to the cabin, a nursery for the child who would arrive with the first snows of their second winter. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, a rider appeared on the horizon. Hayden tensed, one hand moving instinctively to the rifle they kept by the door, but as the figure drew closer, Violet recognized the straight-backed posture of her brother. "Timothy," she called, waving as he approached. "What a wonderful surprise!" Timothy dismounted with a smile, embracing his sister carefully around her swelling middle before clasping Hayden's hand warmly. "The business is doing well enough that I could take a few days," he explained. "And I wanted to see this ranch you've been writing about so proudly." Over dinner, Timothy shared news from his travels, the railroad's inexorable progress westward, the changing face of the territory as more settlers arrived each month, the rumors of statehood in the coming years. "And," he added, his expression growing serious, "I have news of Father." Violet's hand found Hayden's under the table. "What news?" "He's selling the ranch," Timothy said. "I heard it from a cattle buyer passing through Bozeman. Apparently, he's moving back east. Philadelphia, they say, where he has a brother in manufacturing." The news settled over Violet like a weight being lifted one she hadn't fully realized she still carried. "So he's really leaving Montana. By month's end, from what I gather." Timothy studied his sister's face. "Are you all right?" Violet considered the question carefully. For so long, her father had been a looming shadow over her life, even after she had physically escaped his reach. The thought that he would now be hundreds of miles away, that the likelihood of ever crossing paths again was virtually non-existent, brought a profound sense of closure. "I am," she realized. "I truly am." Later, after Timothy had retired to the small guest room they had prepared, Violet and Hayden stood together under the vast Montana sky, his arms wrapped protectively around her from behind, their child stirring beneath his hands. "You ever regret it?" Violet asked softly. "That day in the barn when you stepped between me and my father's whip, your life might have been so different if you hadn't." Hayden turned her gently to face him, the moonlight silvering his features. "Not for a single moment," he said with absolute conviction. "That was the day I found everything I never knew I was looking for." His hand cupped her cheek tenderly. "You gave me a purpose beyond wandering, Violet. You gave me a home." "And you gave me freedom," she replied, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. "The freedom to love, to dream, to become who I was always meant to be." As their kiss deepened under the endless canopy of stars, Violet marveled at how a single moment of courage, his in catching the whip, hers in finally fleeing, had altered both their destinies. From violence had come tenderness. From fear had come love. From the harsh legacy of her father had come the promise of a new generation, raised not with whips and fear, but with gentle hands and open hearts. And as their child kicked vigorously between them, as if joining in this moment of reflection, Violet and Hayden laughed together, the joyous sound of two people who had found in each other not just safety, but a love worth fighting for. The last light of day faded from the western horizon, but neither moved to go inside. They stood wrapped in each other's arms, silhouetted against the darkening sky, a man and woman who had defied convention and circumstance to build something beautiful together on this wild, unforgiving, magnificent land. Never again, Hayden had promised that day in the barn. And he had kept that promise, transforming never again from a shield against cruelty into a foundation for a life filled with tenderness, respect, and boundless love, a legacy they would pass on to their children, and their children's children, for generations to come.